I have more than a few complaints I want to share with Guilty Gear Strive, but I want to get something out of the way first. I absolutely love this game. I haven't been this excited over a fighting game for nearly a decade, and all I want to do is just keep playing more. I would have gotten this review done sooner if I could just keep myself from playing it. I kinda wish I had gotten more into Guilty Gear before, because this one hit all the right notes for me, and I'm so glad to have finally found a new favorite. It's got plenty of issues that, sadly, keep it from being perfect, and I'd honestly understand if veteran players coming in from the previous games aren't too happy with some of the changes. But for myself, and I think for most people, this one's a home run for sure. The story picks up right after the previous game, Guilty Gear Xrd Revelator 2. The Universal Will has been captured and Soul Bad Guy prepares for his long-awaited battle against that man. First, however, Asuka wants to make his case to the world leaders at the upcoming G4 conference. And this is when Ino finally makes her move. She breaks into the Universal Will's prison, easily overpowering the guards, and extracts a powerful entity from her. A being that goes by the name of Happy Chaos and has actually been responsible for a lot of the world's troubles behind the scenes. Ino and Happy Chaos go around causing havoc, which prompts Soul Bad Guy to get back into action and save the world once again. The stories and lore of the Guilty Gear franchise is absurdly convoluted. The official website does provide a webcomic digest of the earlier games, as well as all the story mode cutscenes for Xrd on the Arc System Works YouTube channel. But I'm talking about easy, over 10 hours of story to catch up on just to have an idea of what's going on in Guilty Gear Strive. So, is it worth it? It's okay. It's basically a superhero story when you get down to it. A fairly normal world that's filled with megalomaniacal villains in pursuit of their own goals, and the heroes who fight to defend humanity. That said, there's actually not that much action. The vast majority of the story revolves around pseudo-philosophical conversations, half of which feel like the writers are just trying to pad out the runtime.
Quite some time ago, Soul went into the castle's food storage area. Broke in, to be more precise, since I found the door in shambles. In any case, I came running when I heard the noise. He calls it a refrigerator, but as with all of the castle's facilities, it's spacious to the point of absurdity. Even finding someone in there is no simple task. In time, I found Soul in front of a wall of 5,000 liters of liquor. 84 varieties, all lined up and organized. Now, I can't judge the cost of alcohol by sight alone, but I did recognize the bottle he held in his hands. It was the same kind of cheap liquor you can find in nearly any restaurant. I told him he could have at least chosen something worth the cost of repairs to the door. How do you think he responded? There's hundreds of better drinks out there, but I always end up choosing this one.
Choosing?
That's right. He chose it not for its quality, but because it fits his tastes. You'll understand that, eventually. And a day will come when you find that contradiction beautiful. People have their necessary frivolities.
Necessary frivolities.
But despite the pretentious attitude at times, I kind of like it. All the characters have solid, well-defined motivations, and they stick to them. Watching ideologies clash and the story setting up the next big twist is a lot of fun. Unfortunately, the animations aren't always the best. Little things here and there, like this goofy run cycle, or the fact that Soul is driving a motorcycle on what must be the smoothest road in the entire world. It might sound like nitpicking, but I do believe there's enough of this that it becomes a problem. I mean, what the hell is this? Come on, is this even finished? The English lip sync is also hilariously off. The voices don't even come close to lining up with the mouth animations.
I'd like to believe Asuka's being honest with us. He understands the purpose of the G4 summit.
And by purpose, you mean taking out Soul Bad Guy, the man who saved the world?
Well,
It's not all bad though, it does have its moments. I really like this fight scene between Giovanna and Nagoriyuki, for example. But as a whole, it is a little hit and miss, and I can see some people finding it too slow and boring. But if you like the story from Exerd, then this is more of the same, and for that, I'm totally cool with it. I should bring up that May, Faust, and Ramlethal don't show up anywhere in the story at all, aside from brief cameos during the end credits despite being playable characters. They are there in the relationship chart, and it seems like the information here coincides with the arcade mode, but just you wait, that's its own mess entirely. Other important characters are also completely forgotten from the story mode. I don't think Dizzy, Sin, and Elfelt are ever brought up, with the exception of tiny Easter eggs like Ramlethal's taunt.
Let me put it another way. Do you ever feel lonely?
I do.
Huh?
Kai, Sin, Dizzy, Elfelt. When I can't see them, I get very lonely. I never used to feel this way when I was alone.
Okay, yeah. I think I get it now. That's good to hear.
Negative penalty.
But I did notice my name wasn't on that list.
Oh, that's because you're always with me.
Does that mean I can be with you when you take a shower?
Self-destruct.
At least Jacko is here, and she does play a central role. I'm not expecting every character to return, and I do appreciate that the cast is kept much tighter than in the previous stories. But they can at least acknowledge the important characters. If nothing else, this does manage to be a decent conclusion to such a long-running story. I really feel like pretty much all the loose ends have finally been tied up. Or at least the important ones have, although there is a little cliffhanger after the end credits. The final chapter is also pretty wonky with its explanation of events, and it's a little stale that half the entire story takes place either in the White House or on the front lawn. If you're expecting any of the crazy stages from the game to show up in the story mode, then you'll be disappointed. But for the most part, it is pretty satisfying and I enjoyed it. To make sure no one's confused, I should state that the story mode has absolutely no gameplay whatsoever. It is literally a 5-hour cutscene, with the option to pause, save, and resume later. When Mortal Kombat 9 came out in 2011, it shook things up a bit by having a much more cinematic story mode with select fights to progress the events. This was continued with NetherRealm's other series, Injustice, and even other companies would follow suit, such as Namco's Soul Calibur 5 and Capcom's Street Fighter 5. Guilty Gear Xrd, however, took a different route and instead made several really long cutscenes with no gameplay whatsoever to tell its story. And this has been continued with Strive. It's an interesting decision. By not having to break up the story into gameplay segments, there doesn't need to be any arbitrary stops or excuses for fights, and everything moves along at its own pace. However, it sure would be nice to get a playable story mode, you know? That's where arcade mode comes in. Or at least it would, but it's terrible in this one. It's about the same for every character. It features some extremely brief dialogue, a series of randomized battles, and it ends with a boss fight against a super overpowered Nagoriyuki. I will say it's pretty clever how you get a computer-controlled partner for this fight.
I'd forgotten how much joy a battle could provide. Young woman, your spirit is admirable.
Right?
Not really sure what that means, but thanks.
Let us meet again, odd couple.
We're not a couple.
Alright, that's pretty funny. Wait, that's it? Okay, I'll admit, I wasn't expecting much. I mean, it's a fighting game, but that ending is practically nothing. Well, here's the deal. Depending on your performance throughout the arcade mode, the difficulty will either remain high, or it'll drop and you'll get a worse ending. The conditions, as far as I can tell, seem to be to get through nearly every match without losing a single round. If you're able to accomplish this, you'll get some unique dialogue towards the end, as well as a one-on-one fight this time against an even more overpowered Nagoriyuki as the game's true final boss. Thankfully, you can retry this fight as many times as you'd like, And you'll need to, this guy seriously cheats. Some of his attacks now give him invulnerability frames, and he has what seems like 10 times his normal health. He's even more obnoxious to fight than Justice from the original Guilty Gear. It's a remarkably frustrating fight. It took me over 2 hours and countless retries to finally put him down. You have to play very carefully and cheese the hell out of him, doing stupid things like back-to-back dust combos while he's dizzy. And after all that, is it worth it? Not really. The ending this time is better, but it still pales in comparison to what Guilty Gear itself has done in the past. In the X2 series of games, the story mode featured a short adventure for each individual characters, including extended conversations between the cast, branching paths that encourage replay value, and multiple endings that explore some what-if scenarios. They even do some cool pre-fight cutscene battles.
Heaven or hell? Final, let's rock!
This is an arcade mode done right. Sadly, this didn't quite return an Exurd, opting for a more traditional arcade mode that's similar to Strive, but at least they went through the effort to make unique opening and ending cutscenes for each character while also emphasizing more interactions between the cast. Even the ending of the original Guilty Gear had unique artwork and more interesting dialogue. Strive, on the other hand, is very disappointing. Along with May's best ending, I also got Ramlethal's best ending, and the normal endings for Soul Bad Guy and Faust, and they were all lame. It's not even explained why Faust looks so drastically different this time. I mean, it's mentioned in his character bio, but the point is that they hardly tried at all with the arcade mode. They could have done something really cool with this, but they blew it. Along with that, there's the survival mode. Nothing special here, aside from some stronger opponents with unique colors every 10 matches. Maybe you get something special once you beat every shadow character, which would be 150 fights at this rate, but I don't think I have that kind of patience. At least you can save and quit, then resume at any time later, so you don't have to do it all in one sitting. Still, it's a bare-bones survival mode, there's not a whole lot to it. It's a shame they didn't bring back the Medals of Millionaires mode. That one was unique to Guilty Gear and it's kinda cool. So, arcade mode is a wash and survival is nothing special. Thankfully, mission mode is here to pick up the slack, and it's pretty good. It's basically an extremely long tutorial and it goes into a lot of detail on just about everything you need to know. Some things like running and double jump probably don't need an explanation, but going in depth on things like Faultless defense, building R.I.S.C level, or that crazy Potemkin sliding throw is a big deal, and I appreciate that a lot. Some of these are general fighting game mechanics, such as blocking against cross-up attacks, while others are rules more unique to Guilty Gear. There are even character-specific matchup tips, like how to punish raw supers or avoid trickier attacks. It's not perfect, I really wish there were more combo challenges, for example, but this is the best damn tutorial for a fighting game I've ever played. Street Fighter V sort of tried something similar, and it was a solid attempt, but it doesn't come close to this. Now, with all that said, anyone who's looking to get competent, not even good, just competent, is still going to have to spend plenty of hours practicing their inputs and figuring out new combos and setups in the training room. That's never going to change for this genre, but at least mission mode offers more of a head start than most of these games ever do. That's about it for the single player content. Outside of mission mode, there's not much. Not recommended for those who prefer single player stuff in their fighting games. But on to what really matters, the online multiplayer and the overall gameplay experience. The initial roster of 15 characters is great, with very little overlap in their playstyles. Ino, Giovanna, Chip, and Melia are all essentially rushdown characters, but each of them achieves that in very different ways. With Chip using teleport, Melia can trap and mix up her opponents, Giovanna is a little more honest and straightforward, while Ino is much trickier. Even with Sol, Kai, and Leo having a little of everything at their disposal, invincible uppercuts, good projectiles, options for covering distance, they all still play drastically different from each other. A handful of characters also have their own unique meters and mechanics. Giovanna gets stronger the more meters she has stocked up. Ramlethal can throw her swords, which limits her melee attacks. Kai can weaken his opponents with a lingering electric shock, and Zato and Nagoriyuki have an additional meter to maintain. There's at least one character that should appeal to anyone who picks up this game. I wouldn't be surprised though if several characters have gotten their move list gutted. I'm hardly an expert on the series, so I can't speak for everyone, but Mei in particular is missing a lot of her attacks. Applause for the Victim is the big one, and she's also missing Insegna, Restive Rolling, and Mistfinder. Her new beach ball attack does have its place as a safe setup while the opponent is grounded, but I found the old beach ball to be way better. However, this isn't to say that everyone is overly simplistic. I think that most characters are just fine for the most part, and some of them do have pretty long move lists. Perhaps the more serious changes might be with the general game mechanics. In the past games, you could air dash in an instant and it kept the action very fast. That's been changed for this entry. You can still air dash backwards just fine, but air dashing forwards now comes with a significant delay, which makes your approach far more obvious. Couple this with Guilty Gear's usual forward punch, which is a universal anti-air for the series, and aerial approaches are far more difficult this time around. This balances itself out in an interesting way. Previously, using Faultless defense was necessary to prevent damage from some attacks while airborne, but in Strive, there are no unblockable attacks. The overall speed has been reduced and the risks involved with an aerial approach are now lowered, so to speak. This will no doubt help newer players get a grasp on the game. But veterans who want the more hectic, faster-paced action of the previous games might find this one lacking. I'm happy with it myself, but I am fairly new to Guilty Gear. This is the only game in the franchise that I've tried to take seriously. Another returning mechanic is the classic dust attack. At the press of a single button, you can throw out an overhead that looks nothing like an overhead. Mei does this spinning hook punch, so I can almost accept that she could be hitting her opponent's blind spot. Soul just does an uppercut. How the hell is this considered an overhead? Or what about Anji's umbrella? How the hell is this considered an overhead? Well, the other thing that a dust attack does is launch your opponent high into the air to do a sort of Marvel vs. Capcom style air combo. In the past games, it all happened very quickly, and you really had to practice to get a good dust combo down. So it might not be the best option for some players. In Strive, even a basic dust combo with just a little bit of practice can easily deal about 50% damage. It is a ludicrous amount off of a single button, and it might be the #1 reason why I won a tournament recently. Now, I can see part of the argument here. At higher levels of play, everyone is going to keep their eyes peeled for that orange blast. But there's also 100 other things to look out for. And when your mind is worried about one thing, you're inevitably going to get caught by something else. It's another layer of attacks that both players need to be wary of.
Oh, yeah. He has a really good sense on when to whip that out. It's like, because what you're doing is your mind is primed on, is it gonna be a heavy dolphin or is it gonna be a slash dolphin? It's like, oh no, it's just dust. I'm dead.
It's actually dust. Wrong button.
Once you get more used to the game, you'll start to recognize that orange flash as the telltale sign of a dust attack and react accordingly. But this is no doubt going to piss off new players who'll get suckered into it time and time again. Meanwhile, veterans already know to look out for it, so it's not going to affect them that much. So what's the point then? Is it so exciting to completely turn a match around just because you were able to land a single overhead? I'm not saying to get rid of dust entirely, but I do believe that its damage should be significantly scaled back. The most controversial inclusion in Strive is arguably the new wall break mechanic. As with most fighting games, keeping your opponent in the corner is an important strategy for applying pressure. That's still the case with Strive, however it's now designed to give some breathing room to the victim, but without completely screwing over the offender. Basically, if a combo goes on for too long in the corner, then the victim will get splattered against the wall and be open for one more hit. Upon that last attack, the victim receives some extra damage, the offending player receives a positive bonus upon which their meter regenerates even faster, and the fight returns to a neutral footing. Veteran players might lament the loss of the traditional corner pressure, but I've always liked the idea of a game that consistently returns to a neutral stance and gives both players equal footing. It helps to keep the match exciting and still provides a significant advantage to the winning player, while offering the fighter who's on the back foot one last chance to make a comeback. If it's not the new wall break that's the most controversial aspect, then it's the missing instant kills. The simplest way to describe them is like Mortal Kombat's fatalities, but they can be done at any time during a match. It's not the kind of thing you would see in normal gameplay, it's not that easy to pull off, and in truth, their removal doesn't actually change anything, but it's still a break from tradition that I can't agree with. It was a signature of the series, so much so that it inspired a similar mechanic in Persona 4 Arena, another Arc System Works developed game. Maybe they'll get added in sometime down the line, but it's surprising to me that they've been left out at all. Roman cancels are back, and they are way more user-friendly than ever before. Their main purpose is to either extend combos or block strings, or to help with defense by pushing the enemy away, similar to dead angle attacks from the previous game. You could also extend combos in Exert, however this time a Roman cancel will also pop the enemy up into the air and activate a temporary slow motion effect. This isn't to say that it's been simplified to the point of absurdity, however the barrier of entry has been significantly reduced. With a decent amount of practice, anyone can deal some pretty significant damage with a Roman cancel combo. The better players will still pull off the better combos, especially if they utilized a drift mechanic to manipulate the Roman cancel's effect, but the skill gap has been lowered, that can't be denied. This is a great change for scrubs like myself, but I do understand if veterans are annoyed at my guerrilla tactics. Like most any fighting game, a lot of it comes down to oppressive block strings and the defender looking for those tiny gaps to find an opening, using either the aforementioned defensive Roman cancel or faultless defense to push the opponent away. A little bit like advancing guard from Marvel vs. Capcom 3. To add further pressure to this, Guilty Gear has what's called the R.I.S.C mechanic. It's a gauge that increases with each successful block, which in turn lowers your defense on the next received attack. It might sound harsh, almost as if it's punishing the defender for blocking too well, but the game does a pretty good job at emphasizing an offensive playstyle. Two of the crazier rule changes, in my opinion, are a complete lack of a dizzy status, with the exception of the arcade mode's final boss, and secondly, there is no technical recovery. In past Guilty Gear games, pressing a button while falling in midair will help your character recover and land on their feet. Guilty Gear Strive does away with that, and there are now only 3 recovery states: the soft and hard knockdowns, and a third recovery state reserved for very specific attacks and situations. On the one hand, this simplifies and narrows the pace of the game, but on the other, it creates consistency and ensures that both sides always have a chance at both pressuring the opponent or escaping pressure themselves. So while getting pinned down in the corner can seem overwhelming, the player is provided with all the tools necessary to get out of sticky situations, and is also punished for failing to do so. It's an interesting balance that usually works pretty well. This is such a creative fighting game that's both chaotic and methodical at the same time, and most importantly, a ton of fun. While I feel like there can be a few minor hiccups, there are way more positives than negatives. The strong initial character roster, the great controls, and the potential creativity with strategies and combos. I don't agree with all the rules here and there, some aspects annoy the hell out of me, but when you get right down to it, this game is awesome. It's one of the easier fighting games to pick up and play, but it definitely has the depth necessary to stay exciting. I'm pretty late in talking about the game's presentation, but it is an important facet, especially for Guilty Gear. The music is nothing short of exemplary. I cannot get enough of this stuff. You've got a little bit of over-the-top guttural roars,
You're trapped in the toxic created by this world. That is who you are.
And this stuff sits right alongside some very poppy rock tracks. And just about everything in between. It all manages to fit together so well, none of these songs come off feeling out of place on the same soundtrack. Of course, it's understandable that this music won't be for everyone. While the lyrics do allude to each character's personality, they're also written out in very awkward ways, almost as if it's an English localization of a Japanese song. Which, maybe that's the case, but as far as I know, only English versions of the song were made anyway, so it is kind of weird. On top of that, most of the tracks are sung with a very heavy dose of English, or Japanese singers who obviously have English as their second language. Once again, I think it fits. I think it all comes together well and it's very enjoyable to listen to. But I can understand if some people find it very stupid. Thankfully, following in line with Xrd, you won't find just this game's soundtrack, but also nearly every single song from every Guilty Gear game. This even includes the weirder ones, like Guilty Gear 2 Overture, Guilty Gear Asuka, and even freaking Guilty Gear Vastage, the pachinko game. At this point, I'm disappointed they didn't include the soundtracks from the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and WonderSwan Color games. Seriously, why not? That'd be awesome! More importantly though, why isn't there a playlist option? The Super Smash Bros. Games are pretty great for this, allowing the player to customize the soundtrack to their liking. It's usually not a problem because any given song is awesome, but every once in a while you get an odd one in there.
Duel 1. Let's rock!
Fly away! And go!
It would be nice to keep the music selection random, but still curate it so that I can take out certain songs that I don't want. Also, it's a little lazy that several songs here and there, like the main menu music for example, are just recycled from Xrd. I guess if the music is still good, then go ahead and reuse it? While this isn't normally something I would bring up with other franchises, I find the heads-up display and character select screen deserve mentioning here. Guilty Gear has always had an extravagant style to its display, no doubt meant to play into the heavy metal attitude of the franchise. Even with Xrd being more anime than ever before, you can tell that it was still trying to stick to its heavy metal roots. In the case of Strive, there is a very significant shift in style as it opts for a much cleaner, minimalistic look. I don't have a whole lot to say here other than I like it a lot. Everything's very clean, clear, and easy to read. It's a great heads-up display, but there's no doubt that a lot of the franchise's identity ended up getting lost along the way, which is a bit of a shame. If some balance between the two could somehow be achieved, then I think that would be ideal, but I am happy with what's here as is. The fighting stages are very creative and beautiful to look at, as are the character models. There's even a dynamic lighting system with shadows falling on and off the characters as they move through the battlefield, and each stage has its own sort of lighting and mood. It's hardly perfect though. Here you can see the hard cuts of lighting on Mei's face. It should really be a lot more gradual. The most impressive part, however, are these awesome scene transitions that occur after a wall break or a dust launcher. All of the stages actually come in about 3 or 6 parts, so there's a surprising amount of background variety. Unfortunately, you always default to the same central part of the stage. It would have been awesome if this could be randomized instead to mix things up. This, along with the music playlist feature, seem like such simple solutions. They obviously don't ruin the game, but it's such a shame that they're not implemented in a better way. What I find totally unacceptable, however, is the adherence to symmetrical displays in a 3D game. It made sense for older games, of course. They're not gonna redraw every sprite when there are system limitations and manpower to consider, so it's fine that players 1 and 2 are literally mirrors of each other, and silly graphical details will swap when they switch sides. So, for example, you can have Baiken magically missing her left and her right arm depending on what side of the screen she's on. These days, however, especially with the advent of 3D graphics, that's no longer an issue. I'm totally fine with every character being ambidextrous because, as part of the gameplay, every movement needs to look the same on both sides. But then you get small details like Mei's patch on her jacket or the tattoo on her leg, causing them to jump around just as much as she does. I can forgive Nagoriyuki's magic trick with his jacket switching arms instantly, but Ramlethal's bandages teleporting around is too much. This obviously doesn't make me hate the game, but it does come off as lazy. And these days, there really shouldn't be an excuse. The last aspect I have yet to bring up is the netcode and the ranking system. To put it simply, Guilty Gear Strive's netcode is legendary. I've never played a fighting game with rollback netcode before, so this was an eye-opening experience for me. What always used to kill me about online multiplayer games the most would be shoddy netcode. It really feels like, for once, I can play a fighting game and not blame my win or loss solely due to the internet. What's most remarkable is that I can even connect to other people on another continent. It's nowhere near as good, but honestly, it's almost good enough. Now, the whole system isn't flawless. Even if you are connecting to someone nearby, if you guys don't have good internet, then it's not going to be great. But Guilty Gear Strive at its worst still manages to be remarkably playable. I already love the game a ton as is, but this aspect alone really seals the deal for me. The ranking system they use here is very unlike what I'm used to. Instead of a traditional ranked matches system, you instead get various lobbies to look for other players. In the past, when you go to accept a ranked match, the game might show you the opponent's network connection, and that's about it. The idea was to fight a variety of random opponents and climb the leaderboards. With Guilty Gear Strive, however, you have the opportunity to see everything. The player's name, their experience level, even the character they're going to use. This would be blasphemous in any other game, and indeed in Guilty Gear Strive I've had to wait a rather long time looking for an opponent. Is the matchmaking in this game just bad? It's possible. I've had more than a few errors that forced the whole search process to restart. However, I also wonder if sometimes opponents connect with me and then refuse based on the information they see. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if most people would just rather not fight against Mei. It's a very strange system they have in place, but there are some really interesting aspects about this too. The ranking tower has a total of 10 floors, but you don't have to progress through them little by little. You're free to go as high as you like right from the start. You're just not allowed to go down to a floor, so you can't beat up on the players that are less experienced than you are. Furthermore, there's a special reward for only the best players. An exclusive 11th floor that you have to be really good just to have a chance to enter. And it seems like membership is going to reset each month, which should give everyone a good incentive to keep going after this challenge again and again. In the end though, the point of Guilty Gear Strive's multiplayer isn't necessarily to get an arbitrary ranking title, it's to make it easier to find players to fight against. Oftentimes, I'll rematch the same opponent a good 10 to 15 times back to back, regardless of if I'm winning or losing, just as long as I'm learning something and having fun. It's pretty crazy to me, but the new system just works. In conclusion, Guilty Gear Strive is severely lacking in a lot of areas. The single player is piss poor when it really shouldn't be. The fantastic presentation might not be as good as it could be. Gameplay and the mechanics have a small handful of things that irk me, like some of the hitboxes, for example. Dude, seriously, it's like he is going right through the guy. I mean, come on. But for the most part, I mean, really, for the vast majority of the game, this is extremely good. If the single player were better, and if the matchmaking could be a little more on point, then the game would be almost perfect. Hopefully more content gets added down the line, and I'm not just talking about the paid DLC. This game is a bit lacking at launch, but what's here right now is still great. The netcode alone makes this more than worth it. Hopefully the player base stays alive and active, because I think I can see myself playing this game for years to come.
You're slapped.
Let's make sure. Everyone together? Be fun!
Oh man, this was a long one. I swear, it's not my intention to make reviews this long. I just had a lot to say about this one. Thank you very much for watching my review on Guilty Gear Strive. Now I'm gonna go back in and play some more.
Boom.